Hello and welcome back to another episode of Pursuit the Pod. Hello. Welcome back to this Tuesday with me. As always, I'm so glad that you're joining me here on this Tuesday. Today, I have just finished up the whole story by John Mackey, and the subtitle is Adventures in Love, Life, and Capitalism. And boy, was this book that. John Mackey is the co founder and former CEO of Whole Foods, the grocery store. And if you know me, I love reading autobiographies. I just have a love for hearing people's stories and their life advice. And John's book was great. I loved having it with me these last couple of months. And I've always written and taken notes in all of my books. And now I have a platform to share everything that I learned from these amazing people. So, the number one thing that the theme that I noticed throughout John's book was this idea of dichotomies. I noticed it from the beginning all the way to the end, and that's what I want to talk to you about today is the idea of multiple identities living within us and how that cultivates a really rich life, rich personality, rich identities, and it can also lead to some misunderstandings that people can have in us, as John talks about in his book. And in every book that I read, I heard this one time, there is one line or one page that can encapsulate the whole idea of the book. And as I'm reading books, I'm always looking for what is that one line or that one idea that always truly sticks with me after I'm done with a book and everything isn't in the forefront of my mind anymore. And for me, it was on page 119 of a 300 page book. 400 page book of a 400 page book. About a quarter of the way in, John writes, "It was a relief to meet someone who liked both Wacky Mackey and CEO Mackey and understood how they could be the same person." So here, John is talking about how he just met a man named Chris Hitt, who would later come to become a president at Whole Foods. But this is when they had just met each other. And he described, that Chris was also into personal growth and spirituality, but then also he was in business. He worked on the American Farm Foundation, and so he they would talk about marketing strategies and the customer experience, and then they would also talk about reincarnation and meditation. And so, in this line, John is talking about how it was a relief to meet somebody who appreciated both this wacky Mackey, as some people would call him, because he was into spirituality and, he experimented with psychedelics. And then also, he, was a businessman and he was building his company, Whole Foods. And to have somebody that saw and appreciated both of them, both of those sides for the pros of what they are, he really appreciated that. And that line, I marked it down as soon as I saw it. And I started noticing those dichotomies all throughout the book. And it really stuck with me because, I really resonated with it, as I feel in even a day sometimes I can live completely different personalities. In At 5 a.m., I'm a lifter in the gym, and then by 6:37, I'm an engineer, and then by 3:30 p.m., I'm an EMT, and then in the evening, I'm a girlfriend. So I'm just all of these like completely different aspects, sides of my life, and then but it's all me. It's all one person. And so when he said that line, I really resonated with that, and I'm like, yes, when somebody can see all the sides of you and love and appreciate them and recognize that it's all the same person, it's really cool. And I began to notice that all throughout the book. And one of the most prominent examples of this, and if you know about John Mackey's, business views. Oh, also disclaimer, I've never met John, and all of these opinions and interpretations of his book are exactly that, my interpretations. And I've been listening to him on several podcasts now, so I would encourage you to go directly to the source and read the book. It was great, and listen to him. So these are my interpretations of his content. So, if you know about John Mackey's outlook on business, he is one of the leaders in the idea of conscious capitalism. And even that term, conscious capitalism, is a really clear example of combining things that on the outside could seem opposites. Because common criticisms of capitalism are that it's corporations that are greedy and they exploit people and they put profit over people and the shareholder interests above everyone else, including the community and the people they work for. But John adds this word conscious to the beginning of the word. And again, to the idea of dichotomies, here on page 302, he says, I reject this dichotomy. It is possible to love oneself and love others, to take care of one's own needs while making the world a better place, to be profitable and generous. So, as his ideas and thinking about this started to form, he adopted the term conscious capitalism. And so the shift is from, not only is Whole Foods a business that's out here to make money, that was really never the driving purpose of his pursuit. It was, can this company serve its employees, the customers, the suppliers, the communities? So it's more encompassing than just about profit. And really, the idea of rejecting dichotomies could be the thesis of this whole episode and one of the major themes that I identified in this book. Because instead of asking which side to choose, it's about integrating the best parts of both or all of these different identities. And honestly, when we can combine different identities that seem to have nothing to do with each other, it actually makes a person way more interesting, way more depth. If you have an engineer who also loves to dance or perform in theater, like that creative side of their brain, and then they also have the analytical part of their brain where they're working in an aerospace company. I have a friend like that. It just creates such a richness of life, and when you can pursue vastly different things. And my tennis coach, Chris, also embodies this really well because she studied to be a lawyer and she's also an Ironman athlete, several Ironmans. And she was creating an app at one point, and now she has a blog and she's a writer. She holds all of these different identities. And I think his book really reminded me that we should not reject having multiple identities, um and even thoughts about an idea. Like, we don't have to assume that we hear capitalism and then it's only one-sided. It's important to think about what are all of the sides of an idea and of a person. And so I really appreciate how John brings together this idea with a phrase that he said a lot of times on his podcasts, which is the win-win-win. So instead of looking at business as, for example, one business wins, the other loses, or even that there's only two parties. So the win-win-win is that there's a lot of people that benefit from something. So in the case of business and Whole Foods, it's the customers and the employees and the suppliers and the investors and the communities, which could be seen through nonprofits like the Whole Planet Foundation that he talks about in the book, where they provide micro loans to people all around the world, who might not be able to get loans for their businesses to start up through traditional banking. They just might not have access to it. And it's not like his view on creating a business fueled by a deeper sense of purpose wasn't criticized. Like, there was a point in the book where people were really questioning his leadership because they're saying, "What do you mean, John, that a business runs on love? Like that's not gonna work." But he stuck to his principles, and that's another big thing. If you listen to John speak on his podcasts and even in his book, he talks about this idea of love and how from the beginning of the conception of Safer Way and then into Whole Foods Market, how that was also a prevailing idea. So he says here on page 105, love was an enormous part of what got us started on the journey together. Love fueled our creation of the store, and it turned into something we could have never imagined. And love had kept it alive even through the most difficult moments. And John has this quote that I've heard him say on the podcasts where he says, oh, and he even says in the book, he says, expand into love, don't contract into fear. So even in situations that were difficult for him, where he was trying to make a business decision, he would tell himself to expand into love, don't contract into fear. And I think we can all take that in so many areas of our life. Expand into love and love and listening to what's inside you and where your inner self leads you, what things to pursue. That's a really integral lesson over these last couple of months when it comes to pursuits, is how to know what to pursue. And it's to sit with yourself in those moments of quiet and see what you're drawn to. And really it's always coming back to ourselves, right? And he says it all throughout the book. I mean, he says it again here on page 234. Everything was infused with love. And he talks about how his passion for Whole Foods, his passion and purpose, came from providing fresh, wholesome, natural foods to people. And he says here on page 234, in beautiful stores, staffed by team members who truly cared about our mission. It was simple, but it was everything. It was my passion and my purpose. It was love. So I've really taken that lesson of thinking about the kind of pursuits I want to go on and seeing him find his passion, or seeing him live his pursuit through his passion, and like one in the same has been inspiring to me to find and continue to find things that resonate like that as I hear him talk about. Because even in the beginning, he says that here on page 77, we worked incredibly hard, but it didn't feel like work. It felt more like play, a deeply satisfying and purposeful form of play. And if I turn here to the last page of the book, his last two sentences are 3 sentences. Let us love, let us create, and let us play again and again and again forever. That's really meaningful to me as I think about my pursuits, and I think that's something that we can all take with us as we think about what we want, what we're really going to find satisfaction in. Not just what's going to satisfy the ego in the pursuits that we have, because also it is difficult when you think about how to tie in money, like the whole financial side of being able to support yourself, but then also have, pursue your passion. Sometimes in my head, these things can feel like 2 separate things. Like I pursue my passions and then I pursue something that makes me money. In the case of John and Whole Foods, it was a reminder to me that he was just pursuing his passion and what filled him with love. And then it turned out to be incredibly fruitful from the side of financially, yes, I mean, not without downfalls, as he talks about, but overall, like very successful from everything that he's talked about in the book. And that is truly a lesson that we can all take with us, and to embrace all sides of who we are when we are on these pursuits. So some really interesting chapters that I like to hear John talk about was when he got into hiking. And, so he would go for these very long hikes, hike the Appalachian Trail, and he could temporarily set down the CEO identity, which I think was really interesting because it showed that you do not have to constantly be in this identity that to the external world is very important. You can set that down sometimes and just be, you're not producing anything. You're just existing. When he was in the forest, nobody would recognize him. He would go by a pseudonym, Strider, instead of, his real name. That was his trail name. And that's all still you. That's all still you. That quieter self that you have is not a distraction from the real self you are. It's all one and the same, which is really cool. And what inspires me also about John is not only that he built Whole Foods, but that he has continued his pursuit. So he is now working on a company called Love Life, which is an integrated health and wellness company. And it's basically a place where people can come to one place. They have doctors, they can examine their nutrition. There's a gym, fitness, recovery, lifestyle. He's even mentioned that there's places to work from. So it's more this holistic life and a place for community to come together. And so, while Whole Foods changed people's relationship with food, Love Life broadens that mission to overall health. And I love this. I love this idea because John did not need another line on his resume. He helped build, or he built, like what one of the most successful businesses in the world, and was a pioneer in the organic food space. And he could have retired completely. But instead, he asked, what else can I build and what else can I contribute? And that's very inspiring for me because it touches on the idea of what we talk about here on Pursuit, that the idea of pursuit is that, like, somebody could hear endless pursuit and think about it in two ways. One is from lack and one is from fullness. And so if you come from pursuits from a place of lack, you think that you need to do something because you're not enough and that last accomplishment wasn't enough. And chasing the next accomplishment is to prove your value. But the thing is that no achievement can actually permanently close that gap. So instead, it's about thinking from pursuit from fullness. Like, what can we create? And knowing, and John, it's really cool to see John go through this journey over the book of realizing that he is enough. And that, that's the idea, is that you already are enough, and you create because you have the time, the ability, the resources, resources in terms of financially and time. And then also he has all this experience now from his business ventures, and asking what can he contribute to the community. And so Love Life seems more like a continuation of that mission, of that pursuit, rather than just of another trophy. And another idea that I really appreciate about John's book, also to the idea of dichotomies, is something I've had in my head in a while, and it's this idea of don't love somebody for, or don't hate somebody for why you love them. And I found the once I started noticing this, or once I realized this, I started noticing it everywhere. It's the idea of the best part of someone can be the hardest part of someone, and then the best part of something can also be the hardest part of it. And I noticed this on page 86. So he had started the company Safer Way with a woman named Renee, and they had seen each other for a while, and then they ended up breaking up. And as he was talking about the breakup, he says, Renee had always been a free spirit. That's what had drawn me to her in the first place. And although she'd thrown herself into the creative challenge of the business, I knew it didn't satisfy her soul in quite the same way it did mine. She was restless. So I love this idea because even in love, John saw this idea of the best part of somebody is the worst part of somebody. Like, worst is in quotes. Like, he loved her free spirit, but it was also because of her free spirit that she didn't want to keep doing, quote, the same things day after day. I want to do other things. I want to see the world. So she went off and did that. And same thing in page 216, he says, I've never been somebody who can just keep doing the same thing over and over. It's both a strength and a weakness, as I had learned by this point in my life. Sometimes when you have that ability to just relentlessly do something, it is both a blessing and a curse, and I this book reminds me, it's really cool to hear somebody just naturally talk about that. And it points to the fact that if something on the surface seems like a downside, there's got to be the other side. There's got to be the win 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 of it. What is the other side of this personality trait or this situation that is actually either helping you grow, or is just something new, like a new perspective on this potentially, negative thing. And then also, like, when you do enjoy something, understand that along your pursuits, understand that for that same reason why you might enjoy it, it also might be the exact hardest part of it. And then I really like this line that John says, towards the end of the book. He talks about how it's about the beauty of a whole life. He says that I don't believe life is simply about our happiness or pleasure. It's also about discovering and following our higher purpose and contributing our unique gifts and talents in the brief time that we have on this planet as a human being. The beauty of a whole life is that all of those things can go together. And so that quote really brings together the whole one of the main themes of the book for me, that we do not have to choose between happiness and purpose and pleasure, like always doing something for pleasure in life versus contribution, and play and hard work. In fact, John's book shows how play and work can be the same thing, and that actually leads to a really fulfilling and purposeful career that he built out of building his business. And so the closing message here is that the goal isn't to remove contradictions. Maybe the goal is to integrate them. So you can be ambitious and go after things and already feel like you are enough. You can be urgent and live your life with this sense of, the clock is ticking every day. Like we got to get up, we got to do something, we got to think about where our path is heading, where life is going. And then also you can be present. You can be competitive and you can be loving. You can be profitable like the businesses and you can be generous. You can be scientific and more realist and more like logic, and you can be spiritual and in tune with that. And so, like, essentially, you can be wacky Mackey and you can be CEO Mackey. And to continue this idea of endless pursuit, because the richest lives aren't just split up into, I just do this one thing. I just do this one thing and I am this one person, but they find a way to, make it hold. And so if I could talk to John, I would ask him, like, do you think that the drive to build and explore and to pursue is innate, or is something that can be taught? Like, how would you help young people identify what their pursuit is? And then I would also want to know is, why did one store not feel like enough? Because there was a point where one person in the business thought, they had a really successful first store opening and, they were good there. But John wanted to keep expanded. So what makes one person think, oh, we did it, versus another person think, oh, this could be a whole movement? Was it just an intrinsic personality trait? Was it childhood? Was it the exposure to business through his father? Like, what makes it so that you can have this endless drive, and even after you finish, or even after you leave Whole Foods as the CEO, what makes you want to continue your next pursuit? I'd also want to know, how much did the people around him matter? So did he feel like he was surrounded by ambitious people? Like maybe later in the Whole Foods business, he could have been surrounded by more business people, but how about in the beginning? Did it feel like people around him were ambitious, so he was kind of in that circle, or did he feel more like an outlier? And how much did that influence him? If he did feel like an outlier, how did he get past that? Did it affect him at all? Or if he was surrounded by people, is that what helped motivate him? Like, did his ambition feel normal for his community, or did it feel like out of the ordinary? And I appreciate how John also talks about mortality. And he speaks about how he has this awareness that life ends. And, I think thinking about our mortality can create clarity and some urgency about what we want to do. It helps us prioritize and think what's really important. How would you encourage people to distinguish meaningful urgency from anxiety? And how do you pursue the future and think about what future you want to build without missing the present? And lastly, I would want to know, what drives him now? What does drive him to continue wanting to create something like Love Life? And has his motivation for pursuit changed throughout his life? So those are just a few of my takeaways from John Mackey's The Whole Story. It's a great book, and honestly, I look forward to sharing more lessons from autobiographies and books that I read now, like I mentioned at the beginning, now that I have a platform to share, and to just capture the wonderful lessons from people that they take the time to put together for the world and to share. So thank you, John, for writing this candid book. I also really appreciate the times when he's not afraid to admit that he is, somebody else had an idea that he wouldn't have gone with, but it ended up being a success. I'm specifically thinking about here about the New York store. So they had, okay, one more quick thing and then we'll end the pod. But he had basically Whole Foods had this principle that the stores were going to be in a high visibility area, both to passing traffic, to pedestrians, and they would have parking. And so when the idea of the underground New York location came to be in Manhattan, it challenged all of these ideas about what made a good location, because the first store in the downtown New York area would be in Manhattan. And so John was hesitant, like how would people even find an underground grocery store? But other people saw the opportunity, and it ended up being that the store was really successful. And I appreciate how John describes how he was a risk taker, how he was bold, but he was also willing to be cautious and, really think about if this is best for the store. And it's about really being able to recognize when somebody else sees something that you might have missed, and to be willing to revise your view and to recognize the people that did that. He also talks about, it wasn't all smooth sailing all the time. There, especially in the last 100 pages of the book, John undergoes a little bit of controversy. So one of them is when he was an avid user of the Yahoo Finance message boards, and he wrote messages under a pseudonym. And, he wrote about Whole Foods as if he was just, a regular outside investor, praising the company and defending the leadership and arguing with the critics. But the situation became tough because Whole Foods was also in the process of acquiring a company called Wild Oats. And people were worried that John had secretly been trying to make Wild Oats look bad, but this was not his intention. This was not the case. And so, investigators looked into it. He apologized for it, and he wasn't charged. But this no doubt had to be a very tough time where his character was questioned. But he knows what his intentions are. And so that was a really interesting shift as he did start to get more in the public eye, how some people would argue with his leadership style. And, at first it started off with just arguing with his dad in the boardroom. But then, it went to, other CEOs sending him emails that he should step down as CEO, and just that whole corporate world. It was very interesting to hear about when your intentions of what kind of business you want to create and the purposeful, good-hearted nature of it versus when people can misconstrue and misinterpret some of your actions. So another lesson of dichotomies there, that both can exist. Both your intentions and people's interpretations of those intentions. So that's what I have for you guys on the pod today. If you have read the whole story, please let me know what your thoughts were. And if you haven't, I highly recommend you go and check the book out. And with that, I will surely see you guys next week. Bye-bye.